continuing the theme of interviews about what's happening in our industry today, speaking to industry specialists. Today I'm delighted to welcome Sally Merritt, CEO of evotra. Sally, welcome.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Before we sort of kick into the interview itself, who are you? Where do you come from? What's your background? Tell us a little bit about Sally Merritt.
So Sally Merritt, CEO and co-founder of evotra. I was originally, and for most of my career actually so far, I was a qualified financial advisor. I focused more on the investment management side of things. I had a client base of my own, a team of advisors reporting into me, and I was sure that that was the career path that I was going to follow.
Yeah.
The firm I was working for at the time underwent a pretty big technical transformation program, a new dealing platform, a new portal for clients, and I sort of accidentally fell into this world of projects, and specifically bridging the gap between techie people and change people and the practitioners who were ultimately the recipients of this change. And from there, I guess the rest is history. I now run a team of people who specialise in wealth tech, and by that I mean I've got a team of wonderful people, some of whom are from the wealth space, some of whom are from the tech space, and between us we are a team of individuals who are on a mission to help make tech a success for wealth management businesses and their clients.
So what do you mean by that exactly? How do you help make tech or businesses a success? What's the process you go through?
It's a really good question. So typically we will work on behalf of the firm, the wealth firm, but in collaboration with a technology vendor.
Yeah.
And so it's very much a sort of tripartite approach. It could range from data migrations, implementation, project management, all the way through to that really critical stage of implementation or cutover, as some people call it, all of the training and what I like to call business readiness that goes alongside it. And for me, business readiness is probably my area of specialism because, of course, my background, it's all about helping think about how are we actually going to realise the benefits of the change that we've just undergone. So all about adoption, engagement, not just training and knowledge, but all of the cultural shift that goes with it, the business process, the sort of hearts and minds of all of those people in the business that are ultimately going to embed this change and see it through over the longer term.
So would you say you're sort of an outsource, well, as you've said, implementer, supporter, enabler, I guess, educator? Is that the sort of idea?
All of that. And I think that's really important because every firm we work with, yes, of course, there are similar themes and challenges around the industry, but every firm we work with has slightly different challenges and features and processes and organisational structures. So some of our clients like us to be very much a partner that they can come to when they need us and they tap in and use us as much or as little as they need.
Yeah.
Other of our clients really like us to embed ourselves in the business, become a part of the team, and almost take on roles that arguably they might have otherwise had it themselves, but actually for whatever reason they don't want or can't recruit that role, but actually they need that expertise in-house, and so we embed someone in for as long as they need.
So it sounds like a really useful service.
Thank you, I'd like to think so.
Yeah, okay. Well, as a firm that sort of occupies the gap between wealth and tech, so what patterns or shifts are you seeing in the industry these days? Because there's a lot of change around, isn't there?
So much change. So on the wealth management side, of course, as I think we're all very mindful and aware of, a huge amount of consolidation, mergers, acquisitions, smaller firms that perhaps just don't have the appetite with all of the technical change, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and the compliance and regulations that have become such an overhead. Some of those firms are either retiring if it's a sort of smaller owner-managed business, or being bought by some of the larger players. And so this change across the board, whether you are an aggregator or one of the firms being acquired, there's change everywhere. And as I mentioned just now, there's this combination of regulatory requirements really kind of enforcing change that perhaps has been a bit long overdue. But also, of course, what we're seeing is huge advancements in technology that arguably is long overdue in the wealth industry. You combine those two things together and you've got a really exciting environment of change across the industry.
A lot of challenges though.
hugely.
Massive education.
Absolutely. I think, and I say this as an ex-wealth practitioner myself, I think it's probably fair to say that most financial planners and investment managers are not naturally the most tech savvy. Why would you be? That's not what you do. You're there to advise your clients or run their portfolios. But also, as an industry, we've got this legacy of typically really poor data. And that's nobody's fault. That's not the fault of the people that are recording the data. That's typically because they had nowhere to store it or record it. Or if they did, they didn't know how to use it properly. So we've got years and years of poor data with processes that are relatively paper-based. And suddenly now there's this real drive across the industry to use technology to advance businesses, to find operational efficiencies, to adhere to all the regulatory changes, consumer duty, GDPR, and of course not forgetting the end client at the end of this, who typically now will need a really good client portal with all of the digital features that any consumer would come to expect. And it's a huge challenge because as an industry, we haven't really had any of that.
Well, you say that, but we have, haven't we? We've had back office systems, the same systems in use today for the last 20 odd years. So what's going to change? What is changing?
I think you've just made the point that yes, there has been tech, but it hasn't really changed for at least a decade or two. And actually the world has moved on. Yeah. People now come to expect from their wealth manager, and by that I mean a financial advisor or an investment manager, yeah, exactly what you would expect from your bank or indeed any other company that you deal with.
Exactly.
You would want to have an app, you would want to be able to engage digitally, but also speak to a human that is still an expert in their field that you can pick up the phone to and engage with. And the handoffs between those two, yeah, are absolutely crucial. And that has absolutely been missing. And as we know as an industry, to find those efficiencies that we so very much need to remain competitive, you've got to have tech at the heart of what you do, yeah, enabling that. But tech is only as good as what you tell it to do. And if you're ultimately dealing with really poor legacy data in some cases, yeah, how can tech possibly automate your processes or AI learn the right practices if actually your data isn't telling that story?
Well, of course you can't.
Correct.
I mean, that's the point. And as you quite rightly identified, although tech's been around for a long time, I mean, it is old, to be fair, mm-hmm, and it's not been optimized around the new way of doing business. It's not optimized around digital transformation. And one of the big challenges that has become manifest over the years, of course, is the distributed nature of data. You've got lots of disconnected data silos, unreliable data, as you already rehearsed. And ultimately, I guess people trying to compensate for that inefficiency, running their business on Excel. Is that what you're finding?
Oh, it's almost a standing joke that every firm I speak to will say that they're dealing with multiple spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But actually, that's obviously not really solving the problem. It's really just a sticking plaster at best.
Yeah.
And actually, if you just take GDPR, never mind other regulatory issues and rules that we've got to adhere to, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. If you've got a whole load of data, yeah, okay, fine, not on a piece of paper, it's on a spreadsheet, but yeah, those spreadsheets are all over people's desktops and they're not all talking to each other and they're not getting deleted and they're not getting updated. It's messy.
Well, also, of course, you've got all of your client communications in Outlook and all over the place, and of course, you've got your documents sitting in folders, structures, so it may be. So, correct, you know, trying to answer a subject access request itself must be like a bit of a nightmare for firms. Absolutely. Facing that situation. So we've sort of baseline the industry. It's a bit of a technology disaster area currently. My words, not yours, Sally. Don't worry, I wouldn't put you into that embarrassing situation. But after 20 odd years of using, yeah, back office technologies, we're not really in a great place. But now, of course, everything's changed with consumer duty, as you said, with GDPR. Things have, mm-hmm, to become much more data centric. And firms need to be able to leverage that data to deliver the efficiencies that you've been talking about. So, what is interesting, having established your position, mm-hmm, in this sort of firm client technology gap, what are your clients talking to you about at the moment? What are their main concerns? What's driving them to consider change?
Yeah, so Regulation, compliance, consumer duty is obviously front of mind for so many businesses.
Yeah.
I think the press coverage has arguably died down a bit. You know, the big deadlines for having a plan and then embedding your plan, those have gone. But actually the hard work is really only just getting started.
Yeah.
Because as I now know from having worked in change for these last few years, it's that going live with a piece of change or a piece of tech is not the same as actually embedding it in your business and knowing that it's the right process and that your users can actually function with that new operational model.
Yeah.
So there's still a whole load of work to be done. I think what's really interesting as well is culturally, every firm I speak to, when I actually speak to the individuals in that business, and it could be in any role, client-facing, admin support, operations, everyone I speak to, without fail, says to me they are the busiest they have ever been.
Yeah.
I think, it's a whole number of factors, but ultimately, economically, we've now got firms pushing and pushing to get the maximum possible returns, new business, new clients, but actually with all of these compliance overheads as well, people are all having to do more in their day-to-day jobs. Technology it's got to be the strongest lever to pull to be able to not only improve the ultimate experience for your end client, which is what we're all here to do, and we mustn't lose sight of that, but also to make life easier for your individual employees and ultimately retain your staff in a much happier environment.
So I mean, what is coming across loud and clear to me, correct me if I'm wrong, because I often am, is that firms recognise change is inevitable, which is good. It's a tick in the box, but they're still suffering from a lot of manual, disconnected processes, ways of working, a lot of making it up every time they do the same job, so time spent all over the place. You mentioned consumer duty, so that's obviously a major factor because that brings into the spotlight the price versus value argument. And you could quite legitimately ask, or the FCA quite could legitimately ask, why should a client pay for your business inefficiency?
Yeah.
So how do you address that? How do you help firms confront the issues that are going to be manifest from consumer duty and solve their real challenges? Because on top of all of this, there's got to be price compression as a risk. And that means firms are going to be increasing their ratios of an advisor to client significantly, or fundamentally changing their entire business model approach, the whole proposition and services approach, as I discussed recently with Matt Lonsdale, who was in here a few weeks ago from Davies & Co. and his fantastic white paper, Wealth Management 4.0. How are firms confronting these challenges, and what are they doing about it? How are they beginning their journey to change they should have started clearly, but what are they doing to address these major challenges?
So it's quite interesting. I think strategically, most businesses know what they really need to be doing, but it's a huge task, and often it's a challenge of we don't know where to begin, we don't know what we don't know, what on earth do we do first? Because of the pressures with consumer duty, what we're actually seeing is a number of firms are coming to us about a real sort of a nuanced degree of detail. So can you help me define a better annual review process? Can you help me speed up this thing that we do every day to make that a little bit better for our staff and for our clients? So annual reviews is a really big thing because it's such a core process that everyone follows. And the digital experience for the end consumer, which of course are both absolutely valid and arguably the right things to be doing, but it fundamentally doesn't necessarily address the challenge. What other firms are coming to us saying is actually our entire sort of ecosystem needs to be reviewed.
Yeah.
We know we need to have more control of our data. Data warehouse, it's such a commonly used theme. What we hear quite a lot now is actually, I don't need a data warehouse, I just need a data lake, or even just a data puddle will do. Just a bit of data somewhere would be a great start. And we use that phrase quite fondly, a data puddle, it's better than nothing. Let's start there and then build on it from there. We're starting to hear now most firms say, actually, we do need some kind of a change function. We've never had one before. It was always a bit of a sort of one-off thing. Actually now, there needs to be an in-house change function or transformation office, whatever the size of firm is and what they need to do. But they know that now that really needs focus, and it can no longer be a side of desk project. to fundamentally look at the tech that they're using, the data structures, how the entire operating model fits together.
Yeah.
And what we typically find is that you've got these sort of disparate systems all over the place. How do we integrate those? How do we bring them together with a single source of truth? And that's the piece that's almost so big that most people don't quite know where to begin.
And of course, with good reason, because they're still using the same old technology they've been using for the last 20 years. And if they didn't sort it out then, what's going to change today? I think this is a really important discussion point, and obviously not for today, because obviously my vested interest is, of course, Curo and what we're doing with Microsoft and the Power Platform and all that sort of stuff. But this is not an advert for Time for Advice much. So there you have it. So what about those clients, those new clients that you're bringing on that are struggling with your tech? What's the approach? How do you go about helping a firm? So I'm a financial advice business. I've been in business for 20 years. We've been working this way for all that period. It's great, but now it's not so great. We used to throw people at it. What would your approach be to help me re-engineer the business, focus on the priorities, and get a plan in place? I am understanding that it might take a while, it might take many years to get to that end game. But what are the steps that I would have to go through from your perspective to start that journey?
Yeah, so let me talk through some sort of really real life examples then. So a new firm comes to evotra and says, what do we do? The first thing we'll do is some kind of a discovery, whether it's an interview or a group session, or we can carry out a sort of health check where we get access to your system and create a report. Whatever it is, let's actually start to understand the challenges. Tell us what your problems are and what your main goals are. What we then do is we take all of that and we quite literally put it into a big prioritization log. Okay. So we list all of the things that we've talked about, all of the challenges, what you want to achieve. And then effectively, it's a sort of how big a problem is this, or how big a challenge is it? Yeah. So really high level, small, medium, large, and how critical is it? Is it kind of a nice to have, or is it an absolutely, I really must have this? Yeah. We then circle back, go through that prioritization log and agree what we're going to bite off first. What's interesting is it's normally a combination of the two extremes. It will be a few quick wins, so the small, easy to do things, which is actually really important because what it does is it sends the message to the wider business that actually change is happening. And look, we can make things better. So if we can make things a little bit easier for you day to day, we'll happily do that. But also there's usually one big ticket item that needs to be addressed first. Yeah. And as I mentioned just now, it could be something as just fundamental as here's an onboarding or an annual review process that we follow day in, day out, and it's taking far too long. Can we just make that more effective? To actually, we really need to review the CRM system that we're using, or we really need to start building a data warehouse now because so many people say to us, we don't even know how many clients we have. I don't know what my AUM is. I have no idea what my fee revenue is. There are some really key, basic, fundamental metrics that that every wealth firm should be able to just have at their fingertips. And often that's the kind of stuff that is the big ticket stuff, but it's really crucial.
Scary, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's the reality. And of course the FCA knows that's the reality.
Yes.
And of course they don't love smaller firms because they're difficult to regulate, but they really love the bigger consolidators, and there's a lot of consolidation going on at the moment, as we know, as you mentioned earlier, which rather puts those firms in the crosshairs of the regulator, don't they?
Absolutely.
And so these firms have got an even bigger imperative to get things sorted as a matter of urgency, I would suggest it. But obviously firms you've already mentioned, a lot of businesses are not particularly tech savvy. They want a solution that they can plug in and play, and when they find that actually they've got to do work to implement it, it's always the technology's fault, isn't it? So what do you say to clients that say, God, the technology is not doing what I want to do, I want to get this, that and the other done, but it's getting in the way? How do you sort of reframe that discussion?
So this is where I really sympathise, because I've been there, remember. I was an advisor at my desk every day, picking up the phone to clients and going, oh my goodness, the tech I've got is just such a hindrance. It's not helping me, it's holding me back. And so I really get it and I really sympathise. But equally, what I don't think is fair is just to blame the tech providers. Yes, tech as a whole hasn't served wealth very well, but that's not the fault of any one product or any one company. Actually, that's just a culture that has come from years and years of just not enough sort of product development. I think now what we're seeing, which I'm finding really interesting and is great for me and a wonderful space to be in, is that the tech firms are all working really hard to develop a product that is competitive and moving as fast as we're seeing the technical world develop. And you've really got to move at pace to stay at the top of your game. It would be unreasonable, I think, to expect those tech firms to then also offer completely bespoke, customized training and hand-holding and support, but you also want them to focus all of their money on developing the product and staying front of the game on the tech side. So where my business comes in, I think really nicely, and it's just a joy and a privilege to be in this space, is that we'll work with the wealth firm to say, look, here's the tech. It's not the tech product's fault that you maybe don't know how to use it, or that perhaps your legacy data is exposing some glitches, or that you can't benefit from the automation because the data is a bit poor, and therefore how can it possibly know when your next annual review is due if you don't have the right annual review dates, for example. So let's help you sort those fundamentals to get the best out of your tech.
So it's a cultural thing as well, isn't it? It's actually saying, look, we now need to step back. We need to visualize where we want to be in 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years' time, and begin to challenge our current way of thinking, because clearly things change. Change, as we always know, is the only constant, and firms need to embrace it, otherwise they're going backwards. And as you've already mentioned, at the heart of everything, the foundation of everything is data. And unless you get quality data into that single truth that you've rehearsed and mentioned a number of times, you're always going to be challenged. Is that reasonable? Is that fair?
I think it is fair. I think it's really interesting what you just said about change is the only constant. That's correct. And yet actually it's human nature to be resistant to change. And the thing that I love about what I do and where I've come from is that, wealth as an industry and wealth businesses are all about people, either the people in the firm or the people that you're serving. And so by definition, you need that human touch. Doesn't matter how good your tech is, you've got to be good at what you do, good with your clients, giving them good advice, servicing them very well. The tech is the enabler, but tech isn't everything. And so I really enjoy working with these wealth practitioners in any team, by the way, admin, ops, compliance, front office.
Well, they're all crucial.
Exactly. It's the whole team have got to come together to make this happen. But there's a huge cultural shift that I think does need to happen. That perhaps just has never really been enforced. As I say, the wealth industry just hasn't really moved in a tech space for a long time, and now it has to. And
largely, as a result of perhaps the regulators spending, what was it, £120 million in their own digital transformation. So they will be quite intrusive. I think it's fair to say, isn't it? And are beginning to be quite intrusive with firms, aren't they?
Absolutely. And that is definitely driving the strategy and the priorities that these firms are now trying to deal with.
Fascinating. Okay, so having done all of that and started that journey and helped firms get a bit of a grip on where they should be going, what does good business readiness look like? What does that actually mean, and what does it look like?
I find it fascinating. Business readiness is a term that you can use it, and most people kind of think they know what it means. Actually, it's quite subjective.
I have no idea what it means.
Right, so I think everyone has their own interpretation. Most commonly, I hear people use it interchangeably with training. I see it as so much more than training. If you think that any change that you undergo ultimately was signed off, probably at board level at some point, with some perceived benefit that was expected to be reached, and the cost of that change was justified on the basis of, well, we'll spend this, but then we'll get X out of the back of it. Actually, if you go live with any new tech or any piece of change, it doesn't even have to be tech, a new process, organisational restructure. If you go live with that change, but then you haven't really embedded the right practices to support that ongoing, then actually it's highly likely that you won't realise the benefits of that change. So for me, business readiness is about maximum benefits realisation. And it's very hard to quantify, it's very hard to monetize. So as a business readiness practitioner myself, one of my frustrations sometimes in my role is that it's often the thing that gets de-scoped, the thing that gets pushed out a little bit, or maybe push down the timelines a little bit, or, oh, it's okay because we'll go live a little bit late, but it can get picked up in business readiness. So you're kind of at the end of the production line, if you like.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. And I think you can apply some metrics, even if it is hard to measure. So for me, it's going live with change that doesn't cause some kind of negative disturbance to your BAU practice. So a tech head would call that regression, but I mean, just any kind of negative impact on what you do day to day.
Okay.
I think culture is a biggie. A phrase that we use a lot is that it's really important that people feel that change is being done with them, not being done to them.
Yeah.
They've got to feel like they're part of this. And whilst I totally respect that not everyone will want every bit of change, of course, but what I would want, I think, is that everyone at least understands why it's being done. Even if you don't want or need it in your own role, you understand why this change is happening and you can get on board with why strategically it's the right thing for the business as a whole. Knowledge is probably a third kind of pillar, I'd say, which is ultimately, can people go live on day one? They get into work on a Monday morning after all the change has gone live over the weekend. Can they log on, do their job, follow the new process, use the new tech? And if they don't, by the way, which is okay because no one knows everything on day one, do they know where to go for help? Yeah. Is it signposted? Is there support and troubleshooting tips and FAQs and floor walkers and an extra help desk or an inbox or whatever it may be where people can go to get that help? And then finally, and this is so important, for this to be a sustainable thing, it's that smooth transition back to BAU. So what will often happen, and I'm very conscious that this includes myself, consultants will come in and they'll do all the change. We'll get a load of contractors in to, BAs and testers and trainers. If all of your project team then step away, can the business actually still own and maintain this thing that they've got, whether it's new tech or a new process? If they can't, I don't think business readiness has been done very well, because what that says is that all of the project team have just walked off with all of that knowledge. Thank you very much. See you later. And actually, it doesn't help the business. Yeah. I think business readiness done well involves a really carefully thought out and well-planned handover of knowledge. And that starts much earlier than the day of go live or the bit afterwards. That's embracing it right from the beginning of the journey and helping people come on that journey with you, and training and hand-holding and communicating all the way through, and then working alongside each other so that when the project team does step away, the people in the business who were there to do it day in, day out say, yeah, I've got this and that's fine and I can manage this. And there's quite a tail to that, but it's really important.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there? But isn't go live just the beginning of that journey then? Isn't that just base camp? Because of course, businesses are dynamic. There's regulatory, there's environmental pressures to continually evolve. So recognizing that they've just put a bandage on a potential issue maybe, or have got a base on which they can then build a foundation, what next? And how do you manage the client's expectations to help them realize that, okay, we've been through this project, that baselines the business, that gives you a foundation on which you can build. But this is just the beginning of that journey. And do they get that? And do you support that that ongoing evolution?
It's a really good question. I think more so now than ever before, people do get that. Yeah. And we are seeing it more and more. And I work with some wonderful firms who are really engaged with, we know we've got to do this longer term. Yeah. We know this has got to form a fundamental part of our business structure that we've never had before. Whether that involves hiring a CTO or creating a whole new change process. Yeah. Sometimes firms will set up a change forum with some champions, and they'll have regular meetings, and they'll sort of dynamically talk on an ongoing basis about all of the things that are still coming down the line that they might want to be doing. I think that's absolutely right. There's never this finite, there's your go live day. It's an ongoing, once you've got that new tech or that new piece of change, then how do we maintain that ongoing? And how do we keep building the business, keep being competitive, keep enhancing the service for our clients, and keep all of our users on that journey and keep them engaged in that? Yeah. I think it's a huge challenge. It's culturally a whole new way of thinking. but it's a joy and a privilege to be a part of.
And you're right, it's a critical thing because, of course, you see over time the fruits of your labour, don't you? And Microsoft themselves use the old adage, digital transformation is hard, think big, start small, just start. Yeah. And that's really critical. So it would be remiss of me not to raise those two initials, AI. What's your view on AI and the impact it's going to have on our industry?
I think it's fascinating. And by the way, I say this as a fairly non-techie person myself. Remember, I came from wealth, I didn't come from tech. So I come from a world of, as I mentioned earlier, tech sometimes being a hindrance rather than a help. I think AI is really interesting because we can all see potentially the benefits. Well, actually, I say that. I think we can all see the benefits. We probably don't even know what it could do next because it's just moving so fast that it's quite extraordinary. And I now follow various sort of AI providers and forums on LinkedIn and wherever else. And it's just so fascinating when they start talking about something that I just didn't even know was, in the art of the possible. The challenge is it's a bit of a buzzword in wealth because everyone knows that it's sort of there and we sort of need to think about it. But it's so far away, frankly, from where most businesses are at, which is just sorting out your data, just basic stuff. Yeah. AI will only learn good practice if it's got good data to learn from. I don't think we're anywhere near that in most wealth businesses, which is a challenge. However, there are some elements and pockets of AI that we're already seeing are really helping firms, whether that's just through things like being able to just dictate your meeting notes into some kind of an app that then just jots it all down on a file note for you, just saves you a whole load of time, or some kind of sort of digital enhancement that learns about the client and then says, great, it's X. But I think we're very far away from really embracing AI. We've got to get the fundamentals right first.
I agree, and data is, as we've already said, the foundation of everything. And holding it in a way that allows people access to leverage it, not only to enhance automation or deliver automation, but also provide essential BI, business intelligence and management information. And so, last question, Sally. Reasons to be cheerful? Should we be optimistic about the future of our industry or should we be depressed?
Oh, hugely optimistic. I mean, I've said it already today. I find it a huge privilege to do what I do. It's possibly, I think, the most exciting career path I could have found for myself that I accidentally stumbled on. Because wealth, as we've identified today, is undergoing so much change. But also, so is technology. It's moving so fast that you almost can't keep up with it. It's fascinating. I think it's really exciting. The opportunities are quite literally limitless. And yes, that can be a little bit scary, but I think partner with the right firms, do the research, focus on the fundamentals, get the basics right first, bring all of your colleagues on the journey with you, and actually I think it's a really exciting thing to be a part of.
Sally, thanks. That's been really wonderful. Appreciate you coming up to Oxfordshire today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.